Garrett Hooper stood in the morning light filtering through his kitchen window, watching his 6-year-old son Colin push cereal around his bowl. The boy's dark hair stuck up in the back, and Garrett felt the familiar ache in his chest. Colin had his mother's eyes, the same deep brown that used to catch the light when Valerie laughed. 3 years since the accident at the Riverside construction site, and some mornings still felt like drowning. "Dad, I'm done," 12-year-old Sarah announced, setting her plate in the sink with practiced efficiency. She'd grown up too fast after losing her mother, becoming the little guardian of the household. "Don't forget, my debate tournament runs until 6 today." "I remember, sweetheart." Garrett checked his watch. His current project, a commercial building in the warehouse district, needed his approval on the foundation pour. "Your grandfather said he'd watch Colin this afternoon." Sarah's expression flickered with something Garrett couldn't quite read. "Are you sure that's okay? It's just for an hour or two. Grandpa Glenn's been asking to spend more time with you too." Garrett didn't mention how insistent Glenn Rogers had been lately, how their phone conversations had shifted from coldly polite to oddly eager. The relationship with his father-in-law had been strained since the day Valerie died. Glenn had arrived at the hospital with accusation in his eyes, his grief transforming into rage that needed a target. Garrett had been the project manager for Riverside Plaza, had approved the scaffolding company, had sent his wife to that 7th floor inspection. The liability investigation cleared him completely. The scaffolding company had falsified their certifications, used substandard materials, but Glenn Rogers never accepted those findings. "He's just been different lately," Sarah said quietly. "Like he's planning something." "Different how?" Garrett asked, but Sarah just shrugged, grabbing her backpack. At 12, she was perceptive beyond her years, but Garrett chalked it up to the awkwardness that defined most interactions with Glenn. The man had barely spoken to him at Thanksgiving, had spent Christmas making pointed comments about negligent fathers and justice delayed. The afternoon sun beat down on the construction site as Garrett reviewed the foundation plans with his site supervisor, a gruff veteran named Russ Hobbs. The concrete trucks were lined up, ready to pour, but something about the rebar placement looked off. "This isn't matching the engineer's specs," Garrett said, pointing to a section where the reinforcement bars seemed too widely spaced. "We pour like this, and we'll have structural issues in 5 years. The contractor said it would save us 3 days and 15 grand, Russ replied, but he was already pulling out his phone to call the rebar crew back. This was why Garrett had a reputation for being difficult. He never cut corners, never signed off on work that might fail. Not after Valerie. His phone buzzed. "Glenn Rogers. Have Colin ready by 2 p.m. We'll pick him up." Garrett frowned. They'd agreed Glenn would watch Colin at Garrett's house, not take him somewhere. He typed back, "I'll drop him at my place. You can watch him there." The response came immediately. "My house better. Have his old room set up. Valerie's old toys." Something cold settled in Garrett's stomach. Valerie's childhood home had been sold 2 years ago. Glenn lived in a ranch-style house across town now, built in the 70s, the kind of place with wood paneling and a musty basement. There was no old room for Colin, no toys from Valerie's childhood. But before Garrett could respond, another text arrived. "Sarah doesn't need to know. Just Colin. Quality time with grandson." Red flags were rising, but Garrett forced himself to breathe. Maybe Glenn was confused, or maybe he'd saved some of Valerie's things that Garrett didn't know about. The old man was 62, still sharp, but grief did strange things to people. 3 years of barely contained rage could manifest in odd ways. "Problem, boss?" Russ asked, watching Garrett's expression. "Family thing. My father-in-law wants to take Colin for the afternoon." "The one who blamed you for the Riverside incident." Russ knew the whole story. Everyone in the construction community did. "You sure that's smart?" "He's been trying to reconnect. Maybe he's finally working through his grief." Even as Garrett said it, he didn't quite believe it. But what was the alternative? Deny a grandfather access to his grandson because of a vague feeling of unease? At 2 o'clock, Garrett pulled up to his 2-story colonial in the suburbs, Colin chattering about his day at first grade. Glenn's white pickup was already in the driveway, and the old man stood on the porch, hands in his jacket pockets. He'd lost weight since Valerie's death, his face more angular, eyes harder. "Colin, my boy." Glenn's smile looked practiced, like he'd rehearsed it in a mirror. "Ready for an adventure with Grandpa?" Colin hesitated, pressing against Garrett's leg. "Where are we going?" "My house. I've got a surprise for you." Glenn's eyes flicked to Garrett. Have him back by 7. That work? I thought you were watching him here, Garrett said carefully. Change of plans. Come on. Garrett, you don't trust me with my own grandson. The edge in Glenn's voice was sharp enough to cut. Or are you going to take him away from me like you took my daughter? The words hung in the air between them. Colin looked up at Garrett with confused eyes, and Garrett made a decision he'd regret for the rest of his life. 7 o'clock, Glenn. Not a minute later. Bye, buddy. Be good for Grandpa. Garrett watched Colin climb into Glenn's truck, that cold feeling in his stomach growing stronger. He pulled out his phone and texted Sarah. How's the tournament? Semifinals, came the immediate reply. We're crushing it. Colin with Grandpa Glenn. Yeah, call me when you're done. Garrett drove back to the site, but he couldn't focus. Russ noticed him checking his phone every few minutes, finally suggesting he head home early. Foundation's not pouring until tomorrow anyway. Go be with your kids. The sun was starting to set when Garrett's phone exploded with sound. Sarah's name flashed on the screen, but before he could even say hello, her voice came through broken and terrified. Dad, you need to come home right now. She was sobbing, words tumbling over each other. Grandpa Glenn. He took Colin. He's doing something horrible. Garrett's blood turned to ice. Sarah, slow down. Where are you? I came home early. Won the tournament. Dad, I'm at Grandpa's house and he's... Oh God, he's mixing cement. Dad, he put Colin in the wall. The world tilted sideways. What? He's bricking him in. He's built a wall and Colin's inside it. And he's crying, and I can only see his eyes through a hole, and Grandpa has a trowel, and he's... Dad, please hurry. Garrett was already running to his truck, phone pressed to his ear. Sarah, listen to me. Get out of that house right now. Run to the neighbors. Call 911. I tried. Grandpa locked all the doors and took my phone. I found Mom's old phone in a drawer, but it only works on Wi-Fi. Dad, he's putting another brick up. Colin's screaming. I'm coming, baby girl. I'm 5 minutes away. Keep talking to me. Garrett's truck roared to life, tires squealing as he reversed out of the parking space. Glenn's house was across town, normally a 15-minute drive. He'd make it in 5 if he had to drive on the sidewalk. He did. The truck jumped the curb twice, nearly clipped a mailbox, and Garrett's world had narrowed to a single point. His 6-year-old son trapped in a wall while his grandfather, his own grandfather, sealed him in with bricks and mortar. Sarah's sobs filled the car, Colin's distant screams audible through the phone, and Garrett's mind raced through scenarios, each worse than the last. Still there, Sarah? Why, yes. Dad, he's saying things, crazy things, about Mom, about you, about how you killed her, and now he's going to kill Colin and make you watch him die, and... I'm here. Garrett slammed on the brakes in front of Glenn's ranch house. Lights blazed from inside, and he could see shadows moving in what used to be the garage. Glenn had converted it into a workshop years ago. The front door was locked. Garrett didn't hesitate. He backed up 3 steps and kicked it with everything he had. The frame splintered, but held. Second kick, the wood cracked. Third kick, and the door crashed inward, hanging from one hinge. Glenn. The house was silent except for a muffled crying from the converted garage. Garrett ran through the living room, past Valerie's old photos still hanging on the walls, past the furniture he remembered from Sunday dinners when his wife was alive. The garage door was locked from the inside. He put his shoulder into it. Once, twice, 3 times. The lock gave way with a crack, and Garrett stumbled into a scene from a nightmare. Glenn Rogers stood in the middle of the garage, which he'd transformed into a macabre construction site. A brick wall, rough and still wet, stretched from floor to ceiling, except for a small section at the top where a child's face was visible, streaked with tears and cement dust. Colin's eyes were wide with terror, his small hands pressed against the opening as Glenn methodically lifted another brick, trowel in hand. Sarah stood in the corner, pale and shaking, holding an old iPhone. You came early, Glenn said calmly, not even turning around. Huge mistake, Garrett. I wanted you to arrive at 7:30. Just late enough to watch him suffocate. Just early enough to live with it forever. He placed the brick, began spreading mortar. Like I've lived with watching my daughter die because of your negligence. Garrett's vision tunneled. Every instinct screamed at him to rush forward, to tear Glenn apart with his bare hands. But the rational part of his brain, the engineer's mind that had kept him alive through 3 years of guilt, calculated angles, and risks. Glenn was between him and Colin. The wall looked hastily constructed, but solid enough. Colin's opening was maybe 8 inches square, getting smaller with each brick. "Sarah, get outside now," Garrett said, voice deadly calm. "But now." She ran, and Glenn finally turned to face him. The old man looked different in the harsh garage light. Eyes too bright, smile too wide, the expression of someone who'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "Did you know," Glenn said conversationally, placing another brick, "that a child Colin's age can survive in a small space for about 3 to 4 hours before oxygen deprivation causes brain damage? I researched it extensively. Built this wall over the past month, during my therapy sessions. Nobody questioned why I was buying bricks and mortar." Garrett's hands clenched into fists, but he forced himself to stay still, to think. The wall was maybe 4 feet by 6 feet, crude mortar work, bricks stacked without proper reinforcement. The engineer in him cataloged structural weaknesses even as fury threatened to overwhelm reason. "You blamed me for 3 years, Garrett said, taking a step forward. "But this is on you, Glenn. This is your choice." "My choice?" Glenn's laugh was brittle, breaking. "You sent my daughter to that death trap. You approved the scaffolding, you signed the permits, I was cleared. The investigation. The investigation was a cover-up." Glenn's hand shook as he lifted the trowel. "Everyone protecting everyone else in your little construction club. But I know the truth. You cut corners. You always cut corners. And Valerie paid the price." Colin's crying had weakened to whimpers. Garrett could see his son's chest heaving, the space around him shrinking with each brick. Maybe 30 minutes of air left if Glenn kept working. Maybe less. "You're right," Garrett said, the lie tasting like ash. "You're absolutely right, Glenn." The old man paused, trowel halfway to the wall. "I did cut corners on that project," Garrett continued, moving another step closer. "I approved that scaffolding company because they were cheap. I sent Valerie up there because I was too much of a coward to go myself." Each word was calculated, designed to draw Glenn's attention, to keep him talking instead of building. "You want to punish me? Fine. Let Colin go, and I'll turn myself in. I'll confess to everything." Glenn's eyes narrowed. "You think I'm stupid? You'll say anything to save your son. Then what's the point?" Garrett spread his hands, taking another step. He was maybe 8 feet away now. "If you kill Colin, I'll kill you. Right here, right now. And then both our families are destroyed. Is that what Valerie would have wanted? Don't you dare say her name." Glenn's voice cracked, and for a moment, Garrett saw the broken father underneath the madness. A man who'd lost his only child and spent 3 years drowning in grief and rage with nowhere to put it. But that moment of sympathy vanished when Glenn turned back to the wall and lifted another brick. Garrett moved. He covered the 8 feet in 3 strides, grabbing Glenn's wrist before the brick could connect with the wall. The trowel clattered to the floor as both men struggled. Glenn surprisingly strong for his age, fueled by adrenaline and insanity. "Get off me!" Glenn swung wildly, connecting with Garrett's jaw. Stars exploded in Garrett's vision, but he held on, twisting the old man's arm until Glenn gasped in pain. They crashed into a workbench, tools scattering. Glenn's hand closed around a hammer, and Garrett barely blocked the swing aimed at his head. The hammer glanced off his shoulder, sending pain lancing down his arm, but he used the momentum to drive Glenn backward into the wall. The brick wall, still wet, unstable. The impact sent cracks spiderwebbing through the mortar. Bricks shifted, and Colin screamed as his small breathing hole started to crumble. Garrett's heart lurched. He'd just made everything worse. Glenn laughed, blood trickling from his split lip. "See? You destroy everything you touch. Just like you destroyed my daughter." But Garrett had stopped listening. His eyes were on the wall, on the structural failure he'd just caused. The bricks in the top section were loose now, mortar not set, the whole thing unstable because Glenn had rushed the job, hadn't used proper technique, hadn't let lower courses set before building higher. All the weaknesses Garrett had cataloged in those first seconds came flooding back. He released Glenn and grabbed the workbench, dragging it toward the wall. "What are you, no?" Glenn tried to stop him, but Garrett shoved him aside with enough force to send the old man sprawling. He climbed onto the workbench, reaching for the loose bricks around Colin's opening, pulling them free one by one. They came away easily, mortar still wet, crumbling under his fingers. "Colin, Cover your face. Garrett tore at the wall, bricks falling around him. Glenn was screaming something, scrambling to his feet, but Garrett was operating on pure instinct now. The instinct that had made him a good father, a careful engineer, a man who checked and double-checked, because he'd already lost too much to negligence and chance. The opening widened. Garrett could see Colin now, huddled in a space barely 3 feet by 2 feet, face covered in cement, dust, and tears. He reached in, grabbing his son under the arms, pulling him free as more bricks tumbled down. Colin was sobbing, gasping, clinging to Garrett's neck with desperate strength. Garrett held him tight, jumping down from the workbench just as Glenn charged at them with the hammer raised high. The old man was beyond reason now, beyond anything but rage. Garrett turned, shielding Colin with his body, and felt the hammer connect with his back. Pain exploded along his spine, but he stayed on his feet, stumbling toward the door. "Dad," Sarah's voice, from outside. "I called 911. They're coming." Glenn froze, the hammer dropping from his hand. The sound of approaching sirens filtered through the broken front door, and something in the old man's face crumpled. He looked at Garrett, at Colin crying against his father's shoulder, and his expression shifted from rage to despair. "I just wanted her back," Glenn whispered. "I just wanted my little girl back." Then he turned and ran for the back door. Garrett wanted to chase him, wanted to make him pay for every second of terror Colin had just experienced, but his son was shaking in his arms, and Sarah was running toward them through the garage door, and the sirens were getting louder. He held his children as police cars screeched to a stop outside, as officers rushed in with weapons drawn, as paramedics checked Colin for injuries. The boy was physically fine, some scrapes, shallow breathing from the confined space, but nothing permanent. The psychological damage would take longer to assess. Glenn Rogers was found 3 hours later in Riverside Plaza, the construction site where his daughter had died. He was standing on the 7th floor of the unfinished building, on the edge where the scaffolding had collapsed 3 years ago. Police tried to talk him down, but Glenn stepped backward into empty air, and that was the end of that story. Or it should have been. The funeral was small. Just Garrett, Colin, Sarah, and Glenn's younger brother Louis Rogers, who'd driven in from Nevada looking shell-shocked. Louis was everything Glenn wasn't, soft-spoken, reasonable, horrified by what his brother had done. "I knew he was struggling," Louis said at the wake, nursing a coffee in Garrett's living room. "After Valerie died, he stopped returning calls. When I visited last Christmas, he'd turned Valerie's old room into a shrine. Photos everywhere, her clothes still in the closet. I thought it was just grief." "It was grief," Garrett said quietly. "Just the kind that turned into something else." Colin was upstairs with a trauma counselor Sarah had found online, the third one they'd tried. The first two had seemed too clinical, too detached. This one, a kind woman named Amy Foley, actually got through to him, getting Colin to talk about the dark box Grandpa had put him in. Sarah sat next to Garrett on the couch, her 12-year-old face too serious, too knowing. She'd saved her brother's life by calling Garrett, but she'd also witnessed her grandfather's complete breakdown. "Some things you don't unsee. There's something you should know," Louis said, setting down his coffee. "I've been going through Glenn's house, had to clear it out for the estate. Found some things in his basement. Journals, mostly. Plans." Garrett's skin prickled. "Plans for what?" "For Colin. He'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. The journals go back almost 2 years. Started with fantasies about making you suffer like he was suffering. Progressed into actual logistics, how to build the wall, what materials to use, how long a child could survive in a confined space." Louis pulled out a leather-bound notebook, hands shaking. "But there's more. Glenn wasn't just planning to wall Colin up. That was just the beginning." The notebook was filled with Glenn's neat handwriting, pages and pages of calculations and diagrams. Garrett flipped through them, his stomach turning with each page. There were blueprints for the wall, yes, but also detailed plans for what came after. Glenn had intended to keep Colin in the wall just long enough to cause permanent psychological damage, but not death. Then he was going to pull him out, call the police, and claim Garrett had done it. He'd set up a whole false trail. Text messages he'd planned to send from Garrett's phone. He had Garrett's passwords from years ago when Valerie was alive. Security footage he'd disabled and planned to re-enable at specific times. Even a storage unit filled with construction materials registered under Garrett's name. He was going to frame you, Lewis said unnecessarily. Make it look like you'd snapped and tried to kill your own son. The wall building was supposed to be poetic justice, the builder destroyed by building. Sarah made a small sound of distress, and Garrett pulled her closer. He's gone now. He can't hurt us anymore. But Lewis shook his head. That's the thing, Garrett. I don't think he was working alone. The room went very quiet. What do you mean? Garrett asked carefully. Lewis flipped to the back of the journal, where loose papers were stuffed between the pages. These are emails. Printed out, dated over the past 18 months. Glenn was corresponding with someone, another father who lost a child in a construction accident. Someone who blamed you for it. Garrett's mind raced. Riverside Plaza had been cleared of any wrongdoing, but the scaffolding company had gone bankrupt in the lawsuits. The owner, what was his name? Harvey something, had been financially ruined, lost everything. He'd had a daughter working as the company's safety inspector. She'd been on the scaffolding when it collapsed, fell 7 stories alongside Valerie. Harvey McConnell, Garrett breathed. That's the name on the emails. He and Glenn found each other in some online grief support group. Started feeding each other's rage. According to these emails, Harvey wanted in on the revenge. Said he had his own plans for you. Garrett stood, began pacing. Harvey McConnell lost his business, his daughter, his house. Last I heard, he'd moved somewhere down south, dropped off the grid. These emails are from 2 months ago, Lewis said. He's not down south anymore. He's here, in town. And according to Glenn's last email to him, Lewis's face went pale. Harvey was supposed to be the backup plan. If Glenn failed to finish what he started with Colin, Harvey was going to target Sarah. The world tilted again. Garrett looked at his daughter, at her wide brown eyes, Valerie's eyes, and felt a rage unlike anything he'd experienced in Glenn's garage. That had been hot fury, instinctive and immediate. This was cold, calculated, the kind of anger that didn't explode but compressed into something dense and hard. Show me everything, Garrett said. Over the next 2 days, Garrett became someone he didn't entirely recognize. He read every email, every journal entry, every scrap of Glenn's mad planning. Lewis helped, horrified but determined to make amends for his brother's actions. They built a timeline, a profile of Harvey McConnell, a man who'd lost everything and decided someone needed to pay. The emails revealed a partnership built on mutual hatred and shared grief. Harvey had encouraged Glenn's plans, provided logistical support, even sent money to help buy the bricks and mortar. In return, Glenn had agreed to let Harvey have his turn afterward. Sarah was specifically mentioned as Harvey's target because she was older, more aware, would understand what was happening to her. Garrett reported everything to Detective Russ Hobbs, no relation to his site supervisor, who'd been assigned to Glenn's case. But Hobbs was skeptical. These emails could be faked, the detective said, reviewing the printouts in Garrett's living room. Even if they're real, threatening someone isn't the same as attempting to hurt them. Without concrete evidence that McConnell is planning something imminent, my hands are tied. He corresponded with Glenn for 18 months about murdering my children. I understand your concern, Mr. Hooper. We'll investigate. But right now, we don't even know where McConnell is. These emails route through VPNs and encrypted services. Could take months to track him down, and even then, he could claim it was all fantasy, venting, never intended to act on it. Hobbs closed his notebook. Keep your kids close. Install a security system. I'll do what I can, but legally, there's not much here. After Hobbs left, Garrett sat in his kitchen with Lewis, Sarah upstairs with Colin, both kids unaware of the new threat. The house felt too open suddenly, too many windows, too many ways in. What are you going to do? Lewis asked. Garrett looked at his hands, the hands that had torn down Glenn's brick wall, that built structures meant to last, that had held his dying wife in a hospital room 3 years ago. He'd spent his whole career following rules, checking regulations, doing everything by the book because cutting corners killed people. But the book had failed him. Glenn had nearly murdered Colin despite all the rules and laws and investigations. And now Harvey McConnell was out there somewhere, planning God knows what, and the police couldn't touch him until he actually hurt someone. I'm going to find him, Garrett said quietly. And I'm going to make sure he never threatens my family again. Lewis's eyes widened. Garrett, you can't. Can't what? Protect my children? The law says I have to wait until he actually hurts Sarah before I can do anything. Well, I'm not waiting. But how do you even find him? The police can't track him. Garrett stood, went to his home office, pulled out his laptop. Harvey McConnell owned a scaffolding company. He knows construction, materials, logistics, same as me. He's not going to approach this randomly. He's going to plan, prepare, build towards something. And to do that, he needs supplies. Over the next 3 hours, Garrett did what he did best. He built a model. Not a physical one, but a logical framework of how someone like Harvey would operate. The emails mentioned that Harvey was broke but resourceful, that he'd been learning new skills to prepare for his revenge. Glenn had sent him $5,000 2 months ago. Garrett started searching hardware stores in the Tri-County area, looking for bulk purchases of materials similar to what Glenn had bought. Home improvement centers, lumber yards, anywhere someone planning something elaborate might shop. He used his construction industry connections, people who owed him favors, suppliers who remembered him as the guy who never cut corners. On the second day of searching, he got a hit. A woman named Francisca Romero who managed a hardware store in the industrial district called him back. You were asking about unusual purchases? Large amounts of specific materials? I've got security footage from 3 weeks ago. Guy came in, paid cash for 600 feet of chain link fencing, for industrial padlocks, and a dozen motion sensors. Gave me the creeps. Said he was building a special kennel. Can you send me the footage? 20 minutes later, Garrett was staring at grainy black and white video of a man in a baseball cap and sunglasses. But the gait was familiar. Garrett had seen Harvey McConnell walk across construction sites dozens of times before the accident. Same slight limp from an old injury. Same way of carrying himself. That's him, Garrett breathed. He enhanced the video as much as possible, zoomed in on the truck Harvey had been driving. Partial license plate, Virginia tags. Garrett called Hobbs, but the detective said it would take days to run the plate officially, and even then, it might be stolen or registered to someone else. Garrett didn't have days. The emails had mentioned Harvey planning to act soon after Glenn made his move. Glenn had died 5 days ago. The clock was ticking. So Garrett took a page from Harvey's own book. He went hunting. The industrial district where Francisca's hardware store was located covered maybe 15 square miles of warehouses, abandoned buildings, and self-storage facilities. A lot of places someone could hide while planning something terrible. Garrett drove through it methodically, looking for anything out of place, specifically, looking for Virginia plates, for trucks matching the one in the footage. On the third pass-through, he found it. An old moving truck, same make and model as the one in the video, parked behind a condemned warehouse on the east side of the district. Virginia plates. Garrett pulled over 2 blocks away, got out, approached on foot. The warehouse had been empty for years, scheduled for demolition that kept getting delayed. Chain link fence surrounded it, but someone had cut through the back section, fresh cuts, recent. Garrett slipped through, moving quietly, every sense alert. Inside the warehouse, the main floor was empty concrete and rust, but Garrett heard sounds from below, the basement level. He found the stairs, descended into darkness, using his phone's flashlight to navigate. What he found made his blood run cold. Harvey McConnell had built a trap. Not a wall like Glenn's, but something more elaborate. A cage made of chain link fencing, maybe 8 feet by 8 feet, with motion sensors attached to the corners. Inside the cage was a chair, restraints hanging from the armrests. On a workbench nearby, tools were laid out with surgical precision, pliers, blowtorch, knives, a camera on a tripod, and photographs, dozens of them, tacked to a corkboard. Photos of Sarah leaving school, walking home, sitting in Garrett's truck. Harvey had been following her for weeks. Garrett's hands shook as he pulled out his phone to call Hobbs. But before he could dial, he heard a sound behind him, the click of a gun being cocked. Hello, Garrett. Harvey McConnell's voice was exactly as Garrett remembered it, but harder, colder. I was wondering when you'd figure it out. Garrett turned slowly, hands raised. Harvey looked older than the last time they'd met. Leaner, meaner, with eyes that had seen too much and decided the world owed him blood. The gun in his hand was steady, aimed at Garrett's chest. You couldn't leave it alone, Harvey said. Glenn told me you were smart. Said you'd probably track me down. I told him to kill both your kids when he had the chance, but he wanted you to suffer first. Wanted you to watch one die, then live with the guilt. Glenn was always too theatrical. You're not going to get away with this, Garrett said, keeping his voice level. The police know about you. They're looking. Harvey laughed. The police can't find their own asses with both hands and a map. No, Garrett, this is just between you and me now. Well, you, me, and Sarah. She'll be here in about 20 minutes. Garrett's blood froze. What? I sent her a text from your phone. Took it off you when you were busy gawking at my setup. Told her to meet you at this address. That it was important, that she couldn't tell anyone. She's a good kid. She'll come. The phone. Garrett had been so focused on the cage, the tools, the photos, he hadn't felt Harvey lift his phone. Stupid. Careless. And now Sarah was on her way to a death trap. So here's what's going to happen, Harvey continued. Sarah arrives. You both get in the cage. I lock you in and let the fun begin. I was planning to start with her while you watched, return the favor of watching my daughter die, but having you both here is even better. Glenn's mistake was making it quick. I'm going to take my time. Garrett's mind raced. The gun was a problem, but Harvey was talking, explaining, the classic villain mistake. That meant he wanted Garrett to understand, to suffer mentally before the physical suffering began. That bought time. Your daughter's death wasn't my fault, Garrett said. The scaffolding company lied about their certifications. They used substandard materials. I was cleared. You were cleared by your buddies in the construction industry. Everyone protecting everyone else. But I lost everything. My business, my daughter, my wife left me. I live in a fucking truck. And you? You gotta keep your family, your job, your nice house. Harvey's hand tightened on the gun. Not anymore. Harvey, think about this. You kill me and Sarah, you'll spend the rest of your life in prison. Is that worth it? Prison? I've been in prison for 3 years, Garrett. Prison of grief, of rage, of knowing the man who killed my daughter is walking around free. What's a concrete cell compared to that? Harvey gestured with the gun toward the cage. Now get in. Don't make me shoot you before the fun starts. Garrett calculated angles. Harvey was maybe 10 feet away, gun trained center mass. Even if Garrett rushed him, the odds of getting shot were almost certain. But if he got in that cage, the odds of survival dropped to 0. He needed to stall. Glenn's journals mentioned you had a plan for after. What were you going to do, assuming you got away with this? Smart. Keep me talking. Wait for an opening. Harvey smiled. There is no after. This is it. This is the whole plan. I hurt you. I hurt your daughter. Then I put the gun in my mouth and check out. Glenn was supposed to do the same, but he chickened out. Jumped off a building instead. I'm not chickening out. I'm going to savor every second, then end it on my terms. No after. No escape plan. Harvey was a dead man walking, and that made him infinitely more dangerous. People with nothing to lose couldn't be reasoned with, couldn't be bargained with. Garrett's eyes flicked to the workbench, cataloging weapons. The blowtorch was closest, maybe 6 feet away. The knives were farther. The motion sensors on the cage, what were they for? The sensors, Garrett said, buying time. They trigger something? Cameras. I want every second recorded. Evidence for the world to see what happens when you destroy someone's life. Harvey's smile widened. Now stop stalling and get in the fucking cage. Garrett moved toward the cage, but slowly, dragging his feet. You know, Harvey, for a smart guy, you made a lot of mistakes. Oh, enlighten me. First mistake, telling me the plan. Now I know exactly what to avoid. You're in a basement with a gun pointed at you. Doesn't matter what you know. Second mistake, motion sensors on the cage. They need batteries, and batteries die. How long have these been set up? 3 weeks. Based on those corrosion marks on the chain link, you've been testing this setup, adjusting it. Batteries are probably already weak. Harvey's smile faltered just slightly. Third mistake, Garrett continued, reaching the cage, his hand resting on the chain link, is assuming I'd come here alone. Remember Louis Rogers? Glenn's brother? He's parked 2 blocks away, watching my location on his phone. If I don't text him in the next 5 minutes, he calls the police and gives them this exact address. It was a bluff, but a calculated one. Garrett could see doubt creeping into Harvey's expression. You're lying. Am I? You want to take that chance? Because here's what happens next. Police arrive, find me and Sarah in your torture cage, find all your evidence laid out like a manifesto. You don't get your revenge. You just become another crazy person who got caught before finishing his grand plan. How's that for an ending? Harvey's gun hand wavered. He pulled out Garrett's phone with his free hand, checked the recent messages. Garrett had texted Louis earlier about his search, though not about finding the warehouse. But Harvey didn't know that. Shit, Harvey muttered, and in that moment of distraction, Garrett moved. He grabbed the chain-link fence and pulled with all his strength. The cage wasn't properly secured. Harvey had focused on making it escape-proof from the inside, but hadn't bolted it to the floor. The whole structure toppled toward Harvey, 8 feet of chain-link fencing crashing down on him. The gun went off, deafening in the enclosed space. Garrett felt the bullet pass close enough to ruffle his hair, but then he was on Harvey, driving the man to the ground under the weight of the fence. Metal dug into Garrett's arms, legs, but he pushed through the pain, reaching for the gun. Harvey was screaming, trying to aim the weapon, but the fence pinned his shooting arm at an awkward angle. Garrett grabbed a section of chain link and pressed it against Harvey's throat, leveraging his weight. "Drop it," Garrett snarled. Harvey's face turned red, then purple. His free hand clawed at the fence, at Garrett's face, but Garrett held firm, all the rage and fear and fury from the past weeks compressing into this single moment. He could feel Harvey's pulse hammering under the chain link, could see the veins standing out in the man's forehead. "Drop the gun." Harvey's fingers loosened. The gun clattered to the concrete. Garrett eased the pressure on Harvey's throat, but didn't let go. With his free hand, he pulled out his phone. Harvey must have dropped it when the fence fell. No messages from Sarah. Relief flooded through him. The text Harvey claimed to send must have been a bluff too. He called 911. "This is Garrett Hooper. I need police at the old Mitchell warehouse, basement level. I've got Harvey McConnell detained. He's the man who conspired with Glenn Rogers. He was planning to murder my daughter. I'm holding him until you arrive." The dispatcher tried to tell him to let Harvey go, to wait for police, but Garrett kept the chain link pressed against the man's throat. Harvey wasn't going anywhere. It took 15 minutes for the police to arrive, long enough for Garrett to see his reflection in the puddle of stagnant water nearby, to realize he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. He'd hunted a man, tracked him to his lair, and would have killed him if necessary. The law had failed to protect his children, so Garrett had become the protection himself. Detective Hobbs arrived with the uniforms, took in the scene, the cage, the tools, the photos of Sarah, and his expression went hard. "Jesus Christ," Hobbs breathed. "You were right." Garrett finally released Harvey, who gasped and clutched at his throat. Uniformed officers hauled him up, cuffed him, read him his rights. Harvey looked at Garrett with pure hatred. "This isn't over," Harvey rasped. "Yes, it is," Garrett said quietly. "You're done. Glenn's done. My family is safe. That's the only ending that matters." They took Harvey away, and Garrett gave his statement, showed Hobbs the evidence Harvey had compiled, explained how he'd tracked the man down. Hobbs didn't look entirely happy about the methods. Vigilante justice made police nervous, but he couldn't argue with results. "We'll need you to come down to the station, make an official statement," Hobbs said. "But off the record, you probably saved your daughter's life." Harvey McConnell wasn't bluffing. He was going to take her. Garrett nodded, suddenly exhausted. "Can I see my kids first?" "Go. We'll catch up tomorrow." Sarah and Colin were waiting at home with Lewis, who'd received Garrett's frantic text and rushed over to stay with them. The moment Garrett walked through the door, both children ran to him, and he held them tight, breathing in the smell of Sarah's shampoo and Colin's little kid's sweat. "Is it over?" Sarah asked, her voice small. "It's over," Garrett promised. "You're safe. Both of you." That night, after Colin finally fell asleep and Sarah retreated to her room, Garrett sat with Lewis in the kitchen, drinking coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. "Harvey will go to prison," Lewis said. "Conspiracy, attempted murder, probably more charges. He'll never see the outside again." "Good." Garrett stared into his cup. "Glenn and Harvey, they both lost children in that accident. I get the grief, the rage. But they chose to channel it into hurting innocent people. That's on them. What about you?" Lewis asked gently. "What are you going to do now?" Garrett thought about it. His construction career would continue. He was good at his job, meticulous and careful. His kids would heal, with time and therapy. The house would feel safer once he installed the security system he should have installed years ago. But something had changed in him. He'd tracked down a killer, held a man's life in his hands, made a choice to be the protector when the system failed. That wasn't something you came back from unchanged. "I'm going to be there for my kids," Garrett said finally. "And I'm going to make sure no one ever hurts them again." Lewis nodded, understanding. They sat in silence for a while. Two men who'd both lost people they loved, who'd both been touched by the madness that grief could become. Outside, the city lights glittered in the darkness. Inside, Sarah and Colin slept soundly in their beds, safe behind locked doors, and a father who would burn down the world before he let anyone hurt them again. The nightmare was over, but the lessons remained. 2 months later, Garrett stood in the office of his construction firm, reviewing plans for a new project. His partner, Russ Hobbs, the site supervisor, not the detective, was explaining some concerns about the foundation work. "These specs look over-engineered," Russ said, pointing to the reinforcement bars. "We could save money by—" "No," Garrett said firmly. "We build it right, or we don't build it at all. I'm not cutting corners. Not ever." Russ nodded, didn't argue. Everyone in the company knew what had happened with Glenn and Harvey, though they didn't talk about it much. Garrett had become something of a legend in the construction community, the man who'd survived 2 revenge plots and come out stronger. But Garrett didn't feel legendary. He felt tired, watchful, always looking over his shoulder for the next threat. Post-traumatic stress, Dr. Amy Foley had explained. Perfectly normal after what he'd been through. Sarah was doing better. She'd returned to her debate team, won a regional tournament, and was already talking about college even though she was only 12. Colin still had nightmares about the wall, but they were getting less frequent. Dr. Foley said both kids would be okay, given time. Time. That was the one thing Garrett had now that Harvey was behind bars and Glenn was dead. Time to heal, to rebuild, to be the father his children needed. His phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Dad, debate tournament this weekend. You coming?" He smiled and typed back, "Wouldn't miss it." Outside his office window, the city sprawled in all its messy, complicated glory. Construction sites everywhere, buildings going up, buildings coming down, the constant cycle of creation and destruction that defined urban life. Garrett had been part of that cycle for years, building things that would last, that would shelter people, that would stand against time and weather. Now he'd built something else, a wall around his family. Not made of bricks and mortar, but of vigilance, of determination, of the absolute certainty that he would never again let anyone hurt his children. Some walls were meant to trap. Some walls were meant to protect. Garrett Hooper had learned the difference, and he would never forget it. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.